Hey everyone, it's Alexander, the real Mr. Robinson. Welcome to the channel. This is my review for Piranha II: The Spawning, also known internationally as Piranha II: Flying Killers, which honestly is a cooler title in my opinion. The Spawning doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but Flying Killers, it's corny, but it's more direct. Now, this is a sequel to the 1978 movie Piranha, which was directed by Joe Dante, but it's a sequel in the most vague way possible. There are no returning characters, it's not even the same location, but it is very much the same type of movie. A bunch of killer fish, this time in the ocean off the coast of the Caribbean, start attacking the guests of a nearby hotel resort. And the thing about the piranha this time around is that they've been experimented on more than the fish from the last movie, and judging by the international title, yes, they fly now. 2 years ago, back in the worst year of all of our lifetimes, 2020, I reviewed the original Piranha. I had seen the remake prior, the 2010 remake, but I never saw the original until then, and I thought the original was okay. It had some mildly suspenseful moments. The sounds that the piranha make are very disturbing, and there's some really unsettling kills throughout. But the movie is very much a Jaws knockoff. It's one of the better Jaws knockoffs, but it suffers from the fact that the main characters are responsible for the whole movie happening. They're the reason the piranha are attacking all these people. There are some very weird moments that happen throughout this movie that don't pop up later on, or just there in a flash and you'll miss it. And when I say in a flash, I mean that metaphorically and quite literally. Oh, and also the characters in the movie call the piranha Piranha. So it's a weird movie. Not a terrible one, but certainly not all that great. And I'm gonna be totally honest with you right off the bat. I have never seen Piranha II: The Spawning, and after having watched it for the very first time for this review, I honestly think I like it better than the first Piranha. I know that might be a little sacrilegious to say, but I think there are a few things that this movie gets right that the first movie did not. First of all, your main characters are not responsible for the problem in this movie. They're the ones who are actually trying to fix the problem. Your main character, Anne, played by Tricia O'Neil, is basically a diving instructor at this resort, and she's been there for a while. She knows the marine life in the area, and she gets really suspicious when one of her students is killed by something that she knows nothing about. So she tries to get down to the bottom of what's going on, and also she can say piranha correctly. So already I like the protagonist of this movie more than I did the protagonist of the first Piranha movie, because this character right here is more competent. She's willing to get down to business. She is really desperately trying to solve the problem with these fish. So she's just more of a character that I can root for. Definitely the most competent character of the entire movie, because the other main character is the local sheriff and Anne's estranged husband, played by Henriksen, and he's pretty much Chief Brody if Chief Brody had his doubts about what was going on until it was too late. So he's basically Brody mixed with Vaughn. Though I gotta say, much like with Tricia O'Neil, Lance Henriksen does the best he can with what's given to him. And he's not completely clueless at all. He's not blowing off this fish problem like Mayor Vaughn in Jaws 2, but he certainly has his doubts, and I think it's more to do with the on and off banter he has with his ex-wife. So those are some of the elements of the movie that I actually like. Everything else, though, that the first movie kind of got right, this one did not. The fish in this movie are not all that intimidating. They still make that really weird noise, but whenever they attack people, it's more hilarious than anything, because it's just a bunch of fish flying out of the water and just flapping their wings as they bite onto the necks of their victims. This is a problem, much like with Jaws 2, where they show too much of the killer animal, and thus it's not really all that scary. And speaking of Jaws 2, this movie opens up very similar to Jaws 2. You remember in that movie how it opened up with two divers who own a fancy yacht, diving down to the depths of the orca so they can take pictures with it? And then all of a sudden they get eaten by the shark. Well, Piranha 2 opens up with a very similar setup. You have these two people with a boat that dive down to the wreckage of this ship, except this time around they're not going down there because, oh, let's take pictures and just dive around this sunken ship. No, They're going down there to have sex. Two divers with oxygen tanks head down to the ship for some underwater fucking, and somehow they're magically able to hold their breath. That's pretty impressive, although if I've learned anything from Piranha 3D, it's that if you're naked, you can hold your breath underwater for an infinite amount of time. And then of course, while they're banging, they get eaten by the piranha. So, very similar to Jaws 2. The rest of the characters in this movie, though, are either totally worthless, like Anne's son and the girl that he's fond of, the owner of this resort, who is very much, again, a Mayor Vaughn character from Jaws, where he completely blows off everything until it's too late, or they're completely unlikable, like these two women that own a sailing ship. One of them tries to go inside the hotel restaurant to steal food, and she gets caught, but the employee of the hotel that she gets caught by kind of has a bit of a mental disability. So she sweet talks him into giving her all this food and drink to take to the sailing boat. And then that day when he brings all the food to the boat, she and her friend are like, "Come on board, jump across." And he doesn't jump across because he just falls in the water, and they just kind of leave him behind and like, "See ya, loser." They definitely get what's coming to them because they soon end up being fish food, but unfortunately not in the most graphic way. It's also worth noting that the very first scene involving these two women, one of them is topless, the other is completely nude reading a magazine. And it's very clear when you watch characters like these versus Anne and her estranged husband that there were two different people working on this movie. The reason I'm reviewing Piranha 2: The Spawning is that this is technically the first movie to be directed by James Cameron. I say technically because his name is listed in the credits, but he actually only worked on this movie for about 5 days. The story goes is that the Italian producer of this movie, whose name I'm probably going to butcher to no end, but Ovidio G. Astonitis, he wanted to make a sequel to the original Piranha, but he could only get it made if there was an American director on board. This producer had hired somebody originally, but was fired instantly. And then he heard of a special effects technician who had worked on a few Roger Corman movies before, and that was James Cameron. So James Cameron worked on this movie and tried to do it with the perfectionist attitude that he is well known for. And apparently, shooting this movie was a complete nightmare for James Cameron because when he first arrived, there were no locations scouted for the movie. Most of the crew spoke Italian. I mean, the producer was Italian himself. And it was apparently all a big scheme to try to get Cameron to be fired instantly so the producer could direct the movie himself, because according to Joe Blow's What the Fuck Happened to This Horror Movie, there was an agreement with Warner Brothers that the producer had to have an American director on board to make the movie so Warner Brothers can release it. That didn't work out in the end, so a smaller company ended up releasing the film. But James Cameron showed such a level of dedication to this movie that he actually spent his own money to travel to Italy while the producer was away to try to recut the film himself, only for the producer to find out what he was doing, lock the doors, and recut the movie back to the bizarre, terrible mess that it is. And the only reason that James Cameron is even credited for this movie, even though he only was on it for about 5 days, it was because he'd spent all of his money flying to Italy to try to recut the movie for himself, that he didn't have any money to try to hire a lawyer. He had no money to try to fight this thing, so he just ended up being stuck with a movie that he barely talks about, that he kind of disregards as his first movie. Although I think based on the trailers for Avatar: The Way of Water, he is starting to pull some influence from Piranha 2 Flying Killers, or The Spawning, whatever it's called. To wrap things up and bring it back home, I don't think Piranha 2 is as bad as everyone says it is. I mean, it has a 6% on Rotten Tomatoes, which, yeah, it's a bad movie, but I don't think it's 6% bad. Like I said earlier in this review, I actually think it's better than the first Piranha because of your main character and the fact that they can actually say Piranha correctly. Now, is it the worst movie that James Cameron has directed? By default it is, but that's not really James Cameron's fault because he was just hired by a producer who really wanted to make the movie himself, but due to contractual obligations, he couldn't until he finally just said, screw it, I'm gonna do it myself. So there is no way at all that you can blame James Cameron for this movie, because he didn't really have much time to work on it. Apparently there is a director's cut of this movie. Cameron actually edited a cut of Piranha 2 that's about 20 minutes shorter than what we got in the end. I kind of would like to see that. But with the version of Piranha that we have right here, I'm going to give it the same rating that I gave the first one. Watch at your own risk. Again, I think it's better than the first Piranha, but it's not suspenseful in any way. Most of these side characters are despicable or just downright dumb. And it's just ridiculous. Every time the piranha attacks someone, I laugh my ass off just because the effects are so absurd. Not a good movie at the end, but it's certainly a good bad movie. Not as bad as everyone else says it is. And there you go, that's my review for Piranha 2: The Spawning, or as James Cameron referred to it on 60 Minutes, the best flying piranha film ever made. Now, one other thing to note about Piranha 2: The Spawning and James Cameron's time on it is that he actually at one point felt so sick that he actually had nightmares. One of these nightmares involved a giant explosion and the torso of a cybernetic organism crawling around with kitchen knives in its hands, which sounds very familiar. In fact, James Cameron took this nightmare and ended up making what he credits to be his first feature film, The Terminator, which launched his career, it launched Arnold Schwarzenegger's career, and then after he wrote and directed The Terminator, he got the okay to write and direct Aliens from 1986. And at that point, with 2 for 2 hits on his hand, he had the creative freedom to do whatever he wanted. It's because of those 2 movies that James Cameron ended up being one of the best directors working in the industry today. And his very next movie came out in 1989, The Abyss, which I will be talking about next week because I mentioned it as one of my top 100 favorite movies of all time, and there's certainly a lot to be said about this movie. So join me next week for my review for The Abyss. But for now, I want to know what you guys think about Piranha 2: The Spawning. If you've seen it, what did you think? Whatever the case may be, let me know in the comments below. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell button to get notifications. Don't forget to follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, go check out my Twitch channel, and support me on Patreon. I'll see you guys in the next video, but until then, have a good day, and take care of yourselves.